The door handle turned without a knock. It was a metal-on-metal click that I still hear when the house gets too quiet. I didn't have time to reach for the blanket or pull the hem of my oversized t-shirt down to my knees. I just froze, sitting on the edge of the mattress, my legs bare and the cool air from the hallway hitting my skin. Mark stood there, his hand still on the knob. He didn't look away. He didn't apologize and close the door like a normal person would. He just looked at me. It was only 3 seconds, but it felt like 3 hours. My breath caught in my throat, and I realized for the first time that my bedroom was no longer a sanctuary. It was just a room with a door that didn't lock. Mark had been in our lives for 3 years. He was the good guy my mom finally deserved after my dad walked out. He worked in insurance, wore ironed khakis, and always remembered to bring home my favorite flavor of sparkling water. For a long time, I actually liked him. He was the one who taught me how to parallel park when Mom was too nervous to let me behind the wheel. We were a team. Our house was one of those old craftsman's with creaky floorboards and thin walls. It was cozy, or at least it used to be. Mom worked long shifts at the hospital, leaving Mark and me to navigate the quiet evenings together. We had a routine. We'd order pizza, watch a documentary, and say goodnight at exactly 10 o'clock. There was a sense of safety that I took for granted. I never felt the need to lock my door because I didn't think there was anything to lock it against. I was 18, finishing my senior year and planning my escape to a college 3 states away. Not because I hated home, but because I wanted to see who I was outside of this small town. Mark was supportive. He even helped me research scholarships at the kitchen table. He seemed like the perfect bridge between my childhood and my future, but looking back, there were signs I chose to ignore, small things that didn't feel like threats at the time, the way he'd stand a little too close when looking at my homework, the way he'd comment on how much I looked like my mother in her old photos. It felt like affection. It felt like he was just trying to be the father figure I'd missed out on. I wanted to believe that so badly. I wanted us to be the happy, normal family everyone else saw from the outside. The shift started on a Tuesday. Mom was pulling a double shift, and the house felt cavernous. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water, wearing my usual oversized sleep shirt. Mark was sitting at the kitchen island, a glass of bourbon in front of him. He looked tired, his tie loosened around his neck. "You're growing up so fast, Maya," he said. His voice was lower than usual, thick with something I couldn't identify. I smiled, feeling a bit awkward, and turned to head back to my room. He stood up and followed me into the hallway. He didn't touch me, but he blocked the path to the stairs for just a second too long. "I noticed you don't have a lock on your door," he remarked. I laughed it off, saying we never needed them. He nodded slowly, his eyes tracing the line of my collarbone. "It's an old house," he said. "People should have their privacy." That night, I felt a prickle of unease. I pulled my covers up to my chin and stared at the door. I told myself I was being dramatic. He was just being protective. But the next morning, I found him standing in the hallway right outside my room as I was coming out from my shower, wrapped in a towel. He didn't startle. He just stood there, holding a stack of folded laundry. "Sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know you were in there." But the bathroom door had been closed, and the steam was still rolling out from under the frame. He knew. I hurried past him, my heart hammering against my ribs. My skin felt cold despite the hot water. I started changing in the closet. I started making sure I was fully dressed before I even opened my bedroom door. It was a subtle shift in my behavior, a silent acknowledgement that the rules of the house had changed. I didn't tell Mom. How could I? He was her rock. If I told her I felt weird, she'd think I was just being a moody teenager. I didn't have proof. I just had a feeling that the air in the house was getting heavier every day. The accident with the door happened a week later. I was in my room, sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone. It was late, and I thought Mark was downstairs watching the news. I was only wearing a long t-shirt, thinking I was finally alone. Then, the handle turned. He didn't knock. He just pushed it open. I froze. The shirt didn't cover much, and the way he looked at me wasn't the way a father looks at a daughter. It was hungry. It was deliberate. "Oh, I thought you were asleep," he said. He didn't move. He stood in the frame, his shadow stretching across the floor until it touched the edge of my bed. I pulled the hem of my shirt down, my knuckles turning white. "I'm not," I said. My voice was small. "Please close the door." He lingered for another 5 seconds. He looked at my legs, then back at my eyes. There was a challenge in his gaze, a silent question asking what I was going to do about it. Then he clicked the door shut. I didn't sleep that night. I pushed my heavy dresser in front of the door. The sound of wood scraping across the floor felt like a shout in the silence, but I didn't care. I needed a barrier. The next morning, I moved the dresser back before Mom got home. I felt like a criminal in my own house. I was hiding things, making excuses, and avoiding eye contact. Mark started leaving notes on my desk. Little things like, "You look tired today," or "That blue shirt looks good on you." He'd come into my room when I wasn't there and move things. A book would be on the nightstand instead of the shelf. My pillow would be shifted. It was psychological warfare. He was letting me know that nowhere was off limits. One evening, while Mom was in the shower, he cornered me in the pantry. He reached past me for a box of cereal, his arm brushing against mine. He leaned in close, his breath smelling like peppermint and coffee. "We have a secret, don't we?" he whispered. I pushed past him, my hands shaking. I felt sick. I felt like I was betraying my mom just by existing in the same space as him. I tried to stay out late. I joined a study group I didn't need. I sat in the library until it closed, just so I wouldn't have to be home alone with him. But every time I walked through that front door, the dread returned. I could feel his eyes on me through the walls. I started wearing layers, sweatshirts over t-shirts, even in the heat. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to be invisible. But the more I tried to hide, the more he seemed to seek me out. He was always there, around every corner, a silent weight in the house that was slowly suffocating me. It happened on a Friday. Mom was out with friends, a rare night off. I was in my room, the dresser firmly against the door. I felt safe for the first time in weeks. Then I heard the scratching. He was trying to pick the lock, the tiny, useless hole in the center of the handle. I sat on my bed, paralyzed. I watched the metal turn slowly. He didn't know the dresser was there. When the latch finally clicked, he pushed. The door only opened an inch before it hit the heavy wood of the furniture. "Maya, let me in," he said. His voice wasn't calm anymore. It was urgent. It was dark. "I want to talk to you about your future." I knew what that meant. It wasn't about college. It wasn't about scholarships. I stood up and pushed back against the dresser with everything I had. "Get away from my door!" I screamed. It was the first time I'd raised my voice to him, the first time I'd broken the silence. There was a long pause. I could hear his heavy breathing on the other side of the wood. Then, he spoke in a voice so cold it made my blood turn to ice. "You think your mother will believe you?" he asked. "Who do you think pays for this house? Who do you think she'll choose?" That was it. The mask was gone. He wasn't the good guy anymore. He was a predator who knew exactly how much power he held over us. I didn't open the door. I stayed there, pressed against the dresser, until I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. I didn't sleep. I waited for the sound of my mother's car in the driveway. When she finally came home, I ran downstairs. I told her everything. The door opening, the notes, the dresser, the threat in the hallway. I expected her to scream, to throw him out, to protect me. But she just sat there at the kitchen table, her face pale, her hands trembling. She looked at Mark, who had come downstairs in his robe, looking confused and hurt. "Maya, you must have had a nightmare," he said smoothly. "I was in bed all night. I don't know what you're talking about." He looked at Mom with so much fake concern it made me want to gag. He told her I'd been acting strange lately, that I was stressed about graduation. He played the victim perfectly, and for a second, I saw the doubt in my mother's eyes. That was the moment my heart broke. She didn't kick him out. Not that night. We spent the next week in a house of glass. No one spoke. Mark acted like nothing had happened, while I spent every second in my room with the dresser moved. I stopped eating. I stopped going to school. I realized that the person I trusted most in the world was choosing a lie because the truth was too painful to face. Eventually, Mom found one of the notes he'd left in my room. It was tucked under my mattress, one I hadn't even found yet. It said, "I like it when you wear your hair up." It was his handwriting. There was no denying it anymore. The confrontation was loud. There was glass breaking. There were police officers in our living room at 3 a.m. Mark was escorted out, still claiming he was the one being wronged. But the damage was done. Our perfect home was a crime scene. Mom was a shell of herself, and I was a stranger in my own skin. We stayed in a hotel for a month because she couldn't stand to be in the house. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a footstep. Every shadow felt like a threat. Mark is gone now. A restraining order keeps him away, but it doesn't keep the memories out. We moved to a new apartment, one with heavy deadbolts and a security system that beeps every time a door opens. Mom and I don't talk about that year. We talk about the weather, my college classes, and what to have for dinner. There is a wall between us that no amount of time can tear down. I still check the locks 3 times before I go to bed. I still can't wear an oversized t-shirt without feeling exposed. I realize that safety isn't about doors or walls. It's about the people you let inside. I learned that the hardest way possible. I lost my home long before Mark was kicked out of it. I lost the girl who believed that a door was enough to keep the world away. Sometimes I see a man in khakis at the grocery store and my heart stops. I know it's not him, but my body doesn't know the difference. I'm living my life. I'm moving forward, but I'm always listening for the sound of a handle turning. My mom bought me a beautiful wooden jewelry box for my birthday last week. It came with a tiny silver key. I keep it on a chain around my neck even though there's nothing inside worth stealing.